Welcome to the Explainer. You know, when you're in that vascular surgery viva, there are a handful of trials that just always come up. They're the ones that completely change the game. If you know them cold, you look like a star. If you stumble, well, it's an uphill battle. So today, we're going to crack the big one for aneurysm screening, the MASS trial.
Right, that's the question, isn't it? Tell me about the MASS trial. It sounds simple, but it's designed to see if you can organize your thoughts and speak like a consultant. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to build the perfect structured answer step by step.
Okay, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the why, the clinical question. Then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the trial design, compare the two groups, and then, of course, the results. After that, we'll critique it, what were the good and bad points, before finally pulling it all together into your perfect Viva answer.
Look, to give a really top-tier answer, you can't just jump into the numbers. You have to set the scene. You need to explain the problem they were trying to solve. Why on earth did we need a massive study like this in the first place?
Well, first off, the scale of the problem was just immense. I mean, think about this. Back in 2000, in England and Wales alone, almost 7,000 people a year were dying from ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysms. This wasn't some rare disease. It was a major silent killer. And if you were one of the unlucky ones who had a rupture, your chances were frankly awful. The overall mortality rate was somewhere between 65 and 85%. Many of these patients never even made it to a hospital. And for those who did, emergency surgery was a huge physiological insult with a terrible outcome. It was bleak. So this led to the big question. We had ultrasound. It's cheap, it's easy, it's non-invasive. But would sending men for a scan actually save lives in the long run? Or would we just be finding more aneurysms and subjecting more people to surgery without any real benefit? There was genuine uncertainty, what we call clinical equipoise, and we needed a proper answer. So how'd they go about answering that question? Getting the methods right in your Viva is absolutely critical. It shows you're not just memorizing facts, you actually understand how to appraise evidence. All right, so here are the key things you have to mention. MASS was a large, multi-center, randomized controlled trial, an RCT. They recruited a massive cohort, almost 68,000 men, all between 65 and 74 years old, across 4 different centers in the UK. And this is key. The primary outcome, the main thing they were looking for, was death specifically related to an AAA. The patient pathway was very simple, very pragmatic. Men were randomized into one of 2 groups. The intervention group got an invitation for a single ultrasound scan. If an aneurysm was found, so 3 centimeters or bigger, they went into a surveillance program, and surgery was only considered if it hit 5.5 centimeters, grew really fast, or started causing symptoms. Okay, so let's be crystal clear on what they were actually comparing. What were the 2 arms of this trial? It was beautifully simple. The intervention group, about 34,000 men, got a letter in the mail inviting them for a scan. That's it. The control group got nothing. They just carried on with business as usual. And a really crucial point to make here is that the analysis was intention to treat. That means you analyze people based on the group they were assigned to, not whether they actually went for the scan. That's the hallmark of a really well-designed trial. Right, this is it. This is the money slide. The examiner is waiting to hear if you know the results. What did the trial find? You have got to know these numbers. If you remember one and only one number from this whole thing, make it this one, 42%. There was a 42% relative risk reduction in aneurysm-related mortality in the group that was invited for screening. A result that powerful in a trial this big. It's a real game changer. And looking at the actual numbers makes it even more stark. In the control group, 113 men died from their aneurysm. In the group that got the invitation letter, only 65 did. That's not just some statistical noise. That is a huge, clinically meaningful difference. That's lives saved. And from a statistical standpoint, this was rock solid. The hazard ratio was 0.58. That means the risk of dying from an AAA in the invited group was almost cut in half. And look at those confidence intervals. They're tight, they don't cross 1. The p-value is tiny. So you can say with confidence, this result was highly statistically significant. It was not a fluke. Now here's how you really elevate your answer. How you go from sounding like a senior trainee to sounding like a consultant. You have to offer a balanced critique. No trial is perfect, and you need to show that you know that. So what are the criticisms? Well, they relied on death certificates to determine the cause of death, and we all know those can be inaccurate. But the big one, I think, is that 20% of the men who were invited for a scan never showed up. This non-attendance actually dilutes the effect. It means that 42% risk reduction is probably an underestimate of how well screening actually works. But despite these points, the impact was just monumental. The single trial gave us the evidence we needed to launch national screening programs like the one we have in the NHS today.
All right. We've got all the pieces. Now let's assemble them into that killer's summary, the concise, confident answer you can deliver when the pressure's on. Here's your framework. Just follow these 4 steps. Start with the background, then the methods, then hit them with the results, and finish with the conclusion and the impact. It's a logical flow, it shows you can think clearly, and it projects real confidence.
All right, let's put it all together. The examiner asks, tell me about the MASS trial. Here's your safe, consultant-level answer. Well, the MASS trial was a landmark multicenter RCT that aimed to see if population screening could reduce the high mortality from ruptured AIAs. It randomized almost 68,000 men aged 65 to 74 into 2 groups. One was invited for a one-off ultrasound screen, and the control group had no screening. The primary outcome was aneurysm-related mortality. And the key finding was a statistically significant 42% relative risk reduction in the group that was invited to screening. Now, while it had limitations, like a 20% non-attendance rate, this trial provided the definitive evidence that screening works, and it formed the entire basis for the national AAA screening program we have in the UK today. If you can deliver that, you've absolutely nailed it. You've shown you know the trial, you know its context, and you understand its impact. Now, the real question is, in today's world of EVAR and changing patient demographics, is it time for a MASS 2?